Open a Bible, turn to the very first chapter. Genesis 1:27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. Male and female, created at the same time, together, equal. Now turn to Genesis 2, a different story. Here God creates Adam first, from the dust of the ground. Adam is alone. God sees that this is not good. So God takes a rib from Adam's side and fashions it into a woman, Eve. She is created from him, for him, after him. Two creation stories, two different women. And for over 2,000 years, Jewish scholars, mystics, and storytellers have asked the obvious question, what happened to the first one? Her name is Lilith, and according to Jewish mythology, she was Adam's first wife, created from the same earth at the same time as his equal. She refused to submit. She refused to be beneath him, literally and metaphorically. And when Adam tried to force her, she spoke the ineffable name of God, grew wings, and flew out of Eden. She was erased from the official text, written out of the story, replaced by a more compliant woman made from a man's rib. But she did not disappear. She went underground, into the margins of sacred texts, into mystical traditions, into the nightmares of parents who lost their children, and eventually she emerged again, not as a demon, but as a symbol of something the men who wrote her out of the Bible never intended, female power that refuses to be contained. This is the story of Lilith, and it begins long before the Bible was written. Lilith didn't start as Adam's wife. She started as a wind. The earliest traces of Lilith appear in ancient Mesopotamia, in Sumerian, Babylonian, and Assyrian texts dating back over 4,000 years. In these traditions, Lilitu referred to a class of wind demons or storm spirits. The Sumerian word lil means air or wind, and the Lilitu were spirits of the wild air, particularly the hot, dry wind that blew from the desert. The most significant early artifact is the Burney relief, a Babylonian terracotta plaque dating to approximately 1800 to 1750 BCE, now in the British Museum. It depicts a nude, winged woman with taloned feet, standing on two lions flanked by owls. For decades, scholars debated whether this figure represents Lilith, the goddess Ishtar, or the goddess Ereshkigal. The debate continues, but the plaque has become visually synonymous with Lilith in popular culture. In the Babylonian Talmud, compiled between the 3rd and 5th centuries CE, Lilith appears as a named demon. In Tractate Niddah 24b, she is described as having wings and long hair. In Tractate Shabbat 151b, men are warned not to sleep alone in a house, lest Lilith come to them. She is a night creature, a seducer, a threat. But the critical transformation, from wind demon to Adam's wife, happens in a text that most people have never heard of. And that text changes everything. The gap in Genesis is real, and it has puzzled scholars for millennia. Genesis 1:27 describes the simultaneous creation of male and female. Genesis 2:7 describes Adam being created alone from dust, and then Eve being created later from his rib, Genesis 2:21-22. These are, by any textual analysis, two different accounts. Modern biblical scholarship attributes them to different authorial traditions. The priestly source, P, for Genesis 1 and the Yahwist source, J, for Genesis 2. But ancient Jewish readers didn't have the tools of modern source criticism. They read the Torah as a unified, divinely authored text. And a unified text with two different creation accounts has a problem that demands a solution. The rabbis of the Midrash, the tradition of interpretive commentary on the Torah, noticed the discrepancy. In Genesis Rabbah, one of the earliest collections of Midrash compiled around the 5th century CE, the rabbis discuss the first Eve. Some suggest that God created a first woman, but Adam watched the process, seeing the bones, the muscles, the blood vessels being assembled, and was so revolted that God took her away and started over, this time putting Adam to sleep first. This first Eve is not yet named Lilith in Genesis Rabbah. She is simply the failed first attempt. A woman who was rejected because Adam couldn't handle seeing how she was made. But the seed is planted. There was a woman before Eve. She was removed. And the reason for her removal has something to do with Adam's comfort. It would take another few centuries for that seed to bloom into the full Lilith narrative. The full story of Lilith as Adam's first wife appears in a text called the Alphabet of Ben-Sira, written sometime between the 8th and 11th centuries CE. It is one of the strangest, most provocative, and most controversial texts in Jewish literary history. The Alphabet of Ben-Sira is on its surface a collection of proverbs and stories attributed to the biblical figure Ben-Sira, Sirach. But its tone is irreverent, satirical, even obscene in places, leading many scholars to suspect it was originally a work of parody or social commentary rather than a genuine religious text. And yet, buried within its pages is the narrative that would define Lilith for the next 1,000 years. The story goes like this. When God created Adam, he also created a woman from the earth, just as he had created Adam. Her name was Lilith. Adam and Lilith immediately began to quarrel. The specific dispute, as recorded in the text, is startlingly direct. Adam demanded that Lilith lie beneath him during intercourse. Lilith refused. Her argument was theological. We are both created from the earth. We are equal. Why should I lie beneath you? Adam would not yield. Lilith would not submit. And so Lilith spoke the Shem HaMepharash, the ineffable secret name of God, and flew into the air, leaving Eden entirely. Adam complained to God, "The woman you gave me has run away." God sent 3 angels, Senoi, Sansonoi, and Samanjaluf, to bring Lilith back. They found her by the Red Sea, where she had taken up with demons and was giving birth to 100 demon children, Lilim, every day. The angels delivered God's ultimatum: return to Adam, or 100 of your demon children will die every day. Lilith refused. She chose the death of her children over submission to Adam. But she made a counter-bargain. She would have power over newborn children, boys for 8 days after birth, girls for 20 days, unless she saw the names of the 3 angels written on an amulet, in which case she would withdraw. This is the foundational Lilith text. A woman who chose exile over submission, who chose the death of her own children over returning to a man who would not treat her as an equal. It is, depending on how you read it, either the most frightening or the most liberating story in Jewish mythology. The bargain Lilith struck with the angels had devastating real-world consequences, because it gave communities an explanation for one of the most common and incomprehensible tragedies of pre-modern life: the sudden death of infants. What we now call SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome, has always existed. Babies who appear healthy, who are feeding and growing normally, simply stop breathing in the night. In the modern world, this remains partially unexplained. In the ancient and medieval world, it was completely inexplicable. Lilith became the explanation. If a baby died suddenly and without visible cause, Lilith had taken it. She had come in the night, as she was entitled to by her bargain, and claimed the child. Boys were vulnerable for 8 days, until circumcision, which placed them under God's covenant. Girls were vulnerable for 20. Any death within that window was Lilith's work. This belief was not fringe. It was mainstream in Jewish communities across the Mediterranean, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe for centuries. The Zohar, the foundational text of Kabbalah, composed in 13th century Spain, describes Lilith prowling at night, searching for unprotected infants, and the language is vivid and terrifying. The emotional logic was the same as the Abiku belief we explored in episode 1. In a world without medical explanations for infant death, the supernatural framework provided both a cause and a course of action. You couldn't fight SIDS, but you could fight Lilith. You could hang an amulet. You could write the angels' names. You could do something. And parents did, for over 1,000 years. The amulet tradition around Lilith is one of the most remarkable material culture phenomena in Jewish history. For centuries, from the medieval period well into the 19th century, and in some communities, to this day, Jewish families placed protective amulets in the rooms of newborn babies and their mothers. These amulets followed a specific pattern. The most common form was a piece of parchment or paper inscribed with the names of the 3 angels, Senoi, Sansonoi, and Samanjaluf. Often the text included a direct address to Lilith, "Lilith, begone," or a statement that Lilith had agreed to harm no child protected by these names. The amulets were placed above the door, above the cradle, on the 4 walls of the birthing room, and sometimes tied to the baby's clothing. Some amulets were more elaborate. They included Kabbalistic diagrams, combinations of divine names, psalms, and images of the 3 angels confronting Lilith. The Israel Museum in Jerusalem holds a significant collection of these amulets, some beautifully illustrated, dating from the 17th through 19th centuries. The amulets served a psychological function that modern medicine often fails to provide. They gave parents something to do. In the agonizing vulnerability of a newborn's first weeks, when every parent lies awake, listening for breathing, the amulet was a tangible act of protection. It said, "I am watching. I am fighting. I will not let the night take you." There is a particular amulet formula found in multiple communities across the Sephardic and Ashkenazi world, Adam and Eve barring Lilith. The formula acknowledges Lilith's existence and power while asserting the protective boundary. She is real, the amulet says, but she cannot enter here. In the Zohar, the central text of Kabbalah, attributed to the 2nd century Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, but actually composed by Moses de Leon in 13th century Spain, Lilith undergoes another transformation. She is no longer just a baby snatcher. She becomes a cosmic figure. In the Zohar's complex mythological system, Lilith is the consort of Samael, the angel of death, the chief of the demonic forces. Together, they form a dark mirror of the divine. If God and the Shekinah, the feminine aspect of God, represent the holy union that sustains creation, then Samael and Lilith represent the unholy union that sustains destruction. Lilith in the Zohar is described as the queen of demons, the ruler of the Sitra Achra, the other side, the realm of impurity and evil. She has become the shadow of the Shekinah herself, a dark feminine principle that exists in opposition to the holy feminine. But even in the Zohar, there are cracks of sympathy. Lilith is powerful. She is autonomous. She is feared not because she is weak, but because she refused to be controlled. The Zohar's authors, learned Kabbalists writing in medieval Spain, could not quite escape the implications of their own mythology. They had created a female figure whose defining characteristic was the refusal to submit, and no amount of demonization could entirely obscure the fact that her original sin was demanding equality. In 1972, a magazine launched that would change how the Western world understood Lilith. Lilith magazine, the independent Jewish feminist magazine, took its name from Adam's first wife as a deliberate act of reclamation. Their argument was simple and devastating. Lilith's crime was refusing to be subordinate. If that makes her a demon, what does that say about the people who wrote the story? The feminist reclamation of Lilith had been building for decades. Already in the 19th century, suffragists had noted the implications of the Genesis gap. Elizabeth Cady Stanton's The Woman's Bible, 1895 to 1898, questioned the patriarchal framing of creation narratives. But it was second-wave feminism that fully embraced Lilith as an icon. The argument runs like this. Lilith was created equal. She knew she was equal. When equality was denied, she left. Not because she was evil, but because she valued her autonomy more than comfort. She was then demonized by the very tradition that couldn't tolerate her independence. She was blamed for the deaths of children, the ultimate weapon against a disobedient woman. She was erased from the canonical text and pushed into the margins, and yet she survived. Through mystical texts, through amulets, through folk tales, through the very tradition that tried to destroy her, Lilith persisted. She could not be killed because she was never fully alive in the official story. She existed in the gaps, in the contradictions, in the places where the text couldn't quite close the wound of her absence. Today, Lilith appears everywhere. In literature, George MacDonald's Lilith, Octavia Butler's Lilith's Brood. In music, the Lilith Fair concert series founded by Sarah McLachlan in 1997. In television and film, in tattoos and art. She has become one of the most recognized mythological figures in the world, which is remarkable for a character who was deliberately written out of the world's most widely read book. The men who erased Lilith from Genesis wanted her forgotten. Instead, they made her immortal. There is a lesson in that. Lilith is many things. She is a Mesopotamian wind demon. She is Adam's first wife. She is a child killer. She is the queen of demons. She is a feminist icon. She is all of these things simultaneously, because mythology is not a fixed point. It's a river. It flows through time, picking up sediment, changing course, carrying everything it touches. But at the core of every version of Lilith is a single, irreducible act. She said no. She was asked to submit, and she refused. She was asked to return, and she refused. She was offered comfort in exchange for obedience, and she chose the desert. Every culture has stories about women who refuse. What makes Lilith unique is that her refusal happened at the very beginning, in the first chapter of the first book. She refused before the fall, before original sin, before the exile from paradise. She refused when there was nothing to rebel against except inequality itself, and for that, she was demonized. She was blamed for the deaths of babies. She was erased from the text. She was pushed into the darkest corners of mysticism and folklore. But she did not disappear. She waited. And when the world was finally ready to ask why a woman who demanded equality was called a demon, she was there in the margins, exactly where they left her. Lilith did not need the Bible. The Bible, it turns out, needed her. This concludes the first season of Myths of the World. 5 myths, 5 continents, 5 stories that refuse to be forgotten. Thank you for watching. Subscribe, share, and remember, the stories we try hardest to erase are the ones that matter most.